How significant is this? Is this the breakthrough that the U.S. the Ukrainian forces are talking about?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think this is certainly good news. This is an important way along the road to try to get to the Sea of Azov. So, it's certainly something that was hard fought. There was a lot of bloodshed, and it demonstrated to all of us how hard it is to break through these Russian obstacles and these lines of defense. And there is more hard fighting ahead. So, it's great news. We're happy to see progress, but we need to see a lot more fighting ahead and more of these trench lines before we can get to the kind of offensive all of us are hoping Ukraine can be able to pull off.
Jim, we've been discussing a significant breakthrough throughout the summer, including many times both of us on the program. Why has this major breakthrough been so slow in coming?
Well, it's because of the Russian defensive lines. The Ukraine was not able to start their offensive until just a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. They had to wait for equipment to come in from the west, and while they were waiting, it gave the Russians time to dig these obstacles. And I think, really, frankly, there's not enough understanding about that out here in the public. But I think most of the military folks who were watching this were getting pretty nervous because these were deep trenches. These were dragon teeths, in terms of the anti-tank obstacles. There were 2 or 3 or 4 lines that went back miles in terms of the defensive lines that Ukraine was going to have to get through. And they didn't have air defense and air cover, and they didn't have a lot of the obstacle breaching equipment that they needed. So this has been it's a tough slog. And it's just going to be this way for months to come, I'm afraid.
Jim, how much of a problem is mining and how much mines have been laid by the Russians as traps for the Ukrainian military? And secondly, this is going to be an enormous problem long term for any settlements, sorting out these mines after the war is finished.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's going to be a lot of reconstruction in Ukraine, not just in terms of buildings and towns that have been obliterated, but just demining. It's going to be terrible because we're dealing not just with, a mine, but multiple mines, one on top of the other, that go on for miles. And so while Ukraine is able to break through a path in terms of those minefields, the minefield is broad. So it's going to be after the war before the West and Ukraine together are going to have to get at these mines.
Well, we've talked so much about the mindset of Russian fighters who are in Ukraine and how morale amongst Russians was struggling for so much in the early part of 2023. But the Russian forces have been a lot more resilient this summer than most commentators expected them to be. What do we know about their morale now?
Well, I think the morale is the morale is still low. But the thing is, being on the defensive, in bunkers, in trenches, watching Ukraine bleed as they try to get to them there in their trenches, that's an easier job than what they set off to do a year ago when they were trying to get to Kyiv real fast. So the defensive is easier. But other than that, these are still relatively untrained Russian troops that are in those trenches, not well armed. And the only thing they have going for them right now is the defensive positions that they occupy, and the fact that Ukraine, in fact, is having trouble getting to them. But once Ukraine is able to breach the last obstacle belt and can reach some ground where it's not mined, and they can take advantage of the Western equipment that they've been given, it'll be a different story. But there's some fighting to do before we get to that point.
Let's briefly touch on Evgeny Prigozhin now, who was killed in a plane crash last week. Now, the Russians say that they've confirmed via DNA that it is Prigozhin's body, and the US now says it's increasingly confident that Prigozhin was killed. This all seems to be rather conclusive now, Jim, because there was obviously reports last week of a second aeroplane that may have taken off, but the intelligence now seems to have confirmed it.
That's right. I think I don't think there's so much of a question now about Prigozhin. He was on that plane along with most of his command team, and as well as the founder of Wagner. You know, and so this is something that has decapitated that group, which is what Putin wanted, and they're going to dismantle Wagner. We'll see what he does with the remainder of the troops. See if they're spread out to other war-fighting private militias, or what happens to them. But this is truly cut the head off of the Wagner organization.
Where does Putin's main threat come from now? If Wagner is dead, where is his main source of concern? Is it still internally from within his own party, or is it from an external threat?
I don't think he knows.
Yeah.
I think he is probably as paranoid as you and I would be if we were in his position. He probably doesn't trust too many people now, and he has put out the threat to them by what he did to Prigozhin, that if you try something like this will be your fate. And so I would imagine right now he is looking over his shoulder, but also at the same time those that might threaten him, maybe even in the military or in the intelligence services, the special services, or all other oligarchs. They're not necessarily going to be chomping at the bit to get at him either.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's going to be paranoid. I don't think he's going to feel safe at night, and I'm glad for that.
Well, yeah, many people will agree with you. Do you think the events of the last 7 days have strengthened or weakened his position?
Well, it's certainly strengthened his position in the sense that he's gotten rid of his threat. He has sent messages to others, as I said, that if you try something like this is going to be your fate. He's shown the Russian people he's this tough guy, and that he's not weak, he's strong, and he's going to take care of anybody who goes against him. So I think he has sent out this message of strength. But the very fact that someone was out to have a coup is a sign of some weakness, in the sense that he's got to be worried about others that might be, you know, trying to find ways to get at him. He's going to have to be worried about that. And so there's a weakness there when you're having to look over your shoulder and be worried that you might be done in by a close associate.